In the process of doing research for this DVD release of Peter Pan, the studio archives uncovered a magazine article written by Walt Disney himself, entitled Why I Made Peter Pan. It was originally published in April 1953, just a few weeks after the film's premiere, in a magazine called Brief, which is no longer in publication.
What you are about to see and hear is a dramatic recreation of an abridgment of that article in which Walt Disney explains the special significance of this story for him.
This is truly a rare opportunity for us to hear this story in Walt's own words.
The world of make-believe has always delighted and absorbed me, ever since I was a little boy. It began when I was a child. Every evening after supper, my grandmother would take down from the shelf the well-worn volumes of Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen. We would gather around her and listen to the stories that we knew so well we could repeat them word for word. Of all the characters in the fairy tales, I loved Snow White best. And when I planned my first full-length cartoon, she inevitably was the heroine. Next to Snow White, I cared most for Peter Pan, but my introduction to him was even more exciting. We were living on a farm, and one morning as we walked to school, we found entrancing new posters. A road company was coming to the nearby town of Marceline, and the play they were presenting was Peter Pan, with Maude Adams. It took most of the contents of 2 toy savings banks to buy our tickets, but my brother Roy and I didn't care. For 2 hours, we lived in Neverland with Peter and his friends. I took many memories away from the theater with me, but the most thrilling of all was the vision of Peter flying through the air.
We meet again, Peter Pan! Captain Hook, prepare to die!
Shortly afterward, Peter Pan was chosen for our school play, and I was allowed to play Peter. No actor ever identified himself with the part he was playing more than I. And I was more realistic than Maude Adams in at least one particular. I actually flew through the air. And Roy was using a block and tackle to hoist me. Well, it gave way, and I flew right into the faces of the surprised audience. When I began producing cartoons, Peter Pan was high on my list of subjects. Actually, it was a long time before we began work on the story. In the first place, I was unwilling to start until I could do full justice to the well-loved story. Animation techniques were constantly improving, but they still fell short of what I felt was needed to tell the story of Peter Pan as I saw it. Not until 1947 did we begin production. When we finally sat down to go to work, we faced a real challenge. Peter Pan, you see, is a work of sheer magic, and you do not create magic to order. We had somehow to recreate the essence of make-believe and do it in such a way that millions of people who have known and loved Barrie's play since it was first performed in 1904 would recognize it and approve of what we had done. We found the key to our approach in the words of Barrie himself. Nothing of importance ever happens to us after we reach the age of 12. And he also once wrote the heartfelt plea, "Oh, that we might be boys and girls all our lives." Packed into these 2 sentences is the secret that the author had found. The understanding that no experience of our grown-up lives can equal the experience of the child, to whom everything in the world is bright and new and full of wonder. What Barrie wished to do, and what we had to do in bringing his play to the screen, was to recreate a children's world, but a children's world in which adults could find a place. As a reminder of the difficulty of building this kind of illusory world, our research told us how Barrie himself was in an agony of nervousness on the historic opening night of his play in London. He was afraid of the gallery gods, the tough-minded spectators in the cheap seats. But he worried needlessly. when the audience was asked from the stage the now famous question, "Do you believe in fairies?" they rose to a man to shout yes. Peter Pan's first success, then, was with grown-ups, the sophisticated first-night audience and the adult theatergoers who came on the nights that followed. Not for several days did any children see the play, but when they did, they claimed it for their own. And ever since, Peter Pan has been something unique in the theater, a fairy tale for children and adults. The difficulties of recreating the world that Barry made were great, but they were also exciting and stimulating. Barry's own play notations and stage directions, scribbled during rehearsals, were extremely helpful to us. His concepts of the characters and their reactions to magical events and strange circumstances gave us more insight into what he had in mind than the actual dialogue and scene description. We made no attempt and had no intent to hold the scope of the story to the theater stage dimension. We could define Neverland, which Barry first called Neverland, very much as we pleased. The camp of the Indians, the pool of the mermaids, the trails of the lost boys, the lagoon of the pirate's ship, and the cave and Skull Island, and all the mysterious landmarks of Barry's fanciful geography, all could be established with our own imaginations. There is no miracle the mind can conceive that the cartoon animation technique cannot create. We needed no stage wires to lift Peter and Wendy and their eager co-adventurers into flight across the rooftops. We could detach Peter from his elusive shadow with the stroke of an animator's pencil. We could make the little sprite Tinkerbell glow like a firefly as she darts through space, and have her speak with the sound of bells. Our mechanics of fantasy are certainly different from the ones Barry had at his command 50 years ago, but I think that in some ways we have come closer to his original concept than anyone else has. But he's the same Peter, and it's the same Neverland, and the same Tinkerbell, and the same darling family that we have always loved.